The battle raged. The reek of smoke and death was heavy in the air. The fighting had lasted hours already, the desperate dragoneers throwing themselves time and time again into the dweller horde. They'd killed so many, but the creatures were innumerable, and the gargantuan monstrosity that governed the assault was all but impervious to their attacks. Haldor could see the aligned warriors tiring before his eyes, even as his stone snout tore into yet another of the monsters. This was not sustainable. They were going to lose unless he did something about it. Haldor closed his eyes and channeled all the fathomless rage that had grown in his soul since the day of the Skeldians came, all those years ago. When he opened his eyes, they shone with the blinding fury of the storm. He flew his dragon above the horde, pushing out his chest, and roared. He poured his righteous fury into the cry, and the world trembled before him. Thunder erupted from him in a shockwave, sending hundreds of dwellers sailing up into the sky. A deafening crack of stone sounded through the valley. Haldor watched, breathing heavily, as an overhanging mountain peak shattered in the blast and came tumbling down into the pass. Where it landed, half the dweller army was crushed. As the mountain peak crashed down, the massive parasitic queen writhed violently, clutching at its elongated head with its many limbs. For a moment, Haldor thought as though it was trying to claw something out of its head. Was something disturbing its mind? A disturbing thought? But he didn't want to linger on it. The creature let out an unearthly scream that shook the very air. The remaining dwellers were overcome by sudden frenzy. They surged forward in a maelstrom of destruction, killing as many of their own as well as the exhausted dragoneers. Haldor looked down at the carnage, horrified by the scene. He thought of the village, of the scent of grilling herbs, and the sound of younglings playing outside. Proof that life was out there, and it needed protecting. From this. That was all the courage he needed. He patted his stone snout on the thick neck.
"Thanks for everything, old friend. Live well."
He jumped. He sailed through the air, wind whipping through his hair and beard, and plummeted towards the sanctuary, where the wild churn of dwellers was already cutting through the last lines of defense. He directed his fall carefully, landing astride the foremost of the beasts, wrestling it into submission, muscles groaning with the strain. He rode the wave of dwellers through the gates of the fortress. When the cavernous entrance to the Thundersteel mines came into view, he jammed his hand into the abominable mount's mouth, feeling the sharp teeth cut through skin and the sizzle of poison in his flesh. He mustered all his strength at his disposal and yanked at the dweller, steering it into the mine, deep beneath the earth. Surrounded by veins of Thundersteel, Haldor breathed deeply and smiled. He would protect his people one last time. Lightning crackled. Thousands of years of mountain storms resonated, trapped into the cathedral of awe all around the horde. He poured all of his strength into his axe. His eyes and body paint glowed with thunder, smiled, and released all of his rage in a single blow into the Thundersteel veins. The explosion tore through the mines, a blinding blast of lightning that blew the dwellers into oblivion. The parasite queen took the wave head on. One of her limbs exploded on impact, and she let out a shrill cry of pain. Ignoring the mental hold that seemed to corrupt her judgment, she staggered back into the shadows. As darkness crept back to where it came, a bright morning sun emerged through the clouds and bathed the valley. A gush of frozen wind rushed between the arcs of the sanctuary, strong as ever. The Valkürian range could breathe again. After a few minutes of silence, Haldor, singed and scarred, crawled out of the wreckage. That he had survived can only be the will of the gods, but he was too dazed to feel any kind of religious awe at the idea. Dead bodies of warriors, dragons, and monsters were scattered all around. He shouted the names of his brothers. All but Haldor responded. They were alive. It was all that mattered to him. The Windguard chief approached, limping and clutching at a wounded arm. She gave a small, sad smile.
You fought beyond bravery, Stormraiser. I shall tell your deeds to the Skeldian Council. I'll put in a word to free your brother.
Haldor nodded and grunted. Though he knew the gesture could never make up for the past, it may at least pave the way for a brighter future. That would have to be enough. The Korovian scouting party was far from the lush forests and jungles of their home. Bundled in thick furs they'd picked up along the way, they shivered against the bitter cold of winter. They were melancholy and contemplative. But when they picked up the trail of blood trapped under a thin layer of ice, the scouts all snapped to alertness. Following the trace, they had found a body in a nearby cave, frozen and long dead. A body of someone who should not have been there. An assassin! A second searched the corpse and pulled a curved dagger with distinct carvings.
The crown of Jarlontir. What were they doing here?
The leader of the scouts stepped forward.
Ill deeds, no doubt. Ill deeds that warrant further investigation. We make for the nearby villages. Perhaps we will find answers there.